The public humiliation of the Trump official symbolizes long overdue accountability, and when viewed closely, it reveals more than just an isolated spectacle. For years, many officials within the Trump orbit operated with a sense of immunity, projecting themselves as figures who could bend the rules, dismiss criticism, and act without fear of repercussion. They cultivated an image of invulnerability, one that emboldened them to cross lines that most public servants would never dare to approach. This specific moment of public downfall shattered that illusion, providing a stark reminder that arrogance and disregard for norms have limits. What makes this instance particularly powerful is the very public nature of the humiliation. It wasn't hidden behind closed doors, whispered among political insiders, or buried in obscure reports. Instead, it unfolded in full view of the nation and the world, demonstrating that accountability can emerge in the most visible, undeniable way. For those who had long felt that power was being abused without consequence, this was a vindication, a moment of clarity when the shield of invincibility cracked open. The humiliation wasn't simply about embarrassment, it represented a rare but important shift in the balance of power. Officials who once wielded influence as though it placed them above the law or beyond criticism suddenly found themselves on the receiving end of public scrutiny and scorn. This was not just an individual reckoning but a symbolic one, embodying the frustration and outrage that had been building for years. Many citizens had grown disillusioned, believing that those in positions of power were never held to the same standards as ordinary people. The spectacle of a top Trump official being called out, confronted, and reduced from a place of authority to one of vulnerability struck a chord with those who had been waiting for justice in some form, even if symbolic. Such public accountability moments resonate deeply because they disrupt the narrative that power is permanent or unshakable. Political officials often rely on their image of control to sustain their authority, and when that façade crumbles, it sends ripples far beyond the individual involved. Supporters and critics alike are forced to reevaluate what they are seeing, and the myth of invincibility begins to collapse. What happened here was a reminder that institutions, while slow, can eventually catch up to individuals who misuse their positions. In this case, the humiliation served as a mirror, reflecting back the arrogance and disregard that had defined so much of the official's tenure. People who once felt silenced or dismissed found a measure of satisfaction in watching accountability play out publicly. The symbolism of this moment is also important because of the broader political climate in which it occurred. During the Trump years, a culture of defiance against norms and institutions was not only tolerated but often celebrated within the administration. Officials were encouraged to push boundaries, challenge established truths, and disregard the press, watchdogs, and critics. In that environment, public humiliation carried even more weight, because it broke through the carefully constructed armor of defiance. The very act of being exposed in front of the public created a rupture in the narrative of control and strength. For many, this humiliation wasn't just about an official's personal downfall, it was about exposing the cracks in a larger system of arrogance and manipulation. The event also highlighted how important the public's role is in shaping accountability. While formal institutions like courts, committees, and oversight mechanisms play their part, public perception often delivers the sharpest blow. When humiliation happens in front of cameras, in speeches, or in highly visible moments, it takes on a life of its own. It enters the public consciousness, spreads across social media, dominates news cycles, and becomes a lasting part of how the individual is remembered. For this Trump official, the humiliation wasn't a fleeting embarrassment, it became a defining mark that no spin or damage control could erase. In this sense, it was long overdue accountability, not just because it arrived after years of misconduct, but because it arrived in a form that could not be ignored or buried. This incident also demonstrates how power often blinds individuals to their own vulnerability. When someone is constantly shielded by authority, surrounded by loyalists, and buoyed by a political machine, they may start to believe that nothing can touch them. Yet the higher the pedestal, the more dramatic the fall. Public humiliation strikes hardest against those who believed they were untouchable, because it forces them to confront a reality they had long dismissed. This moment, therefore, was not only satisfying for observers but also deeply instructive, Power without accountability is fragile, and arrogance always carries the seeds of downfall. In the context of American politics, such moments serve as reminders of democratic values. They reassure citizens that, even if imperfectly, the system can still demand answers and deliver consequences. The humiliation of this Trump official was more than a personal reckoning. It was a cultural event that reinforced the principle that no one is beyond reproach. It restored, at least temporarily, a sense of balance by showing that authority figures could be brought down not by backroom deals, but in front of the very public they once tried to mislead or dismiss. That visibility was crucial because it made the accountability undeniable, turning what could have been a quiet reprimand into a national lesson about the limits of unchecked power. The idea of long overdue accountability resonates because people had been watching this official and others for years, growing increasingly frustrated with what they saw as double standards and impunity. Every instance of defiance, every dismissal of legitimate criticism, every act of evasion had compounded into a sense that justice would never arrive. When it finally did, in the form of public humiliation, it felt like a release of pressure, like a long brewing storm finally breaking. This was not just about one official being embarrassed, it was about the emotional weight carried by a public that had felt powerless in the face of arrogance. Watching the official falter under the glare of exposure allowed people to believe, if only for a moment, that justice can manifest in visible and meaningful ways. This moment reflects how arrogance and abuse of power eventually collapse under scrutiny, and that truth is one of the most consistent patterns in history. When individuals in positions of authority allow pride to blind them, when they mistake their temporary influence for permanent immunity, the very qualities that help them rise often become the seeds of their downfall. In the case of this Trump official, arrogance was not simply a personal flaw, it was woven into the way they carried out their duties, the way they addressed the public, and the way they dismissed critics. For years, the arrogance was on full display, reinforced by a culture that rewarded defiance and treated accountability as a nuisance. The abuse of power, from disregarding norms to manipulating rules in self-serving ways, created a house of cards that seemed sturdy from the outside but was destined to collapse once real scrutiny was applied. What made this collapse so significant is the way scrutiny revealed the hollowness behind the bravado. Officials who believe they can bend reality to their will often underestimate the persistence of truth. They may silence opponents temporarily, distract the media with counter-narratives, or surround themselves with loyal defenders, but scrutiny has a way of cutting through noise. Once attention focuses on the misuse of power, once facts are laid bare in the public eye, the image of invincibility shatters quickly. This moment showed how arrogance may shield someone in the short term, but under the weight of exposure, it becomes a weakness rather than a strength. The very confidence that once kept critics at bay transformed into a spectacle of downfall when reality could no longer be denied. The abuse of power always leaves a trail, whether in decisions that erode trust, actions that betray democratic values, or words that disrespect the very people one is meant to serve. Over time, those trails converge into a pattern too visible to ignore. This Trump official embodied that trajectory, each act of overreach, each dismissal of accountability. Each flaunting of authority built up a public record that was bound to resurface under close examination. The scrutiny that eventually unraveled their image was not an isolated investigation but the accumulation of years of behavior finally being weighed in the open. It underscored a lesson as old as politics itself: arrogance might delay consequences, but it cannot erase them. The collapse under scrutiny also demonstrates how fragile power really is when it relies on intimidation rather than legitimacy. Arrogance projects strength, but it is hollow, dependent on the perception that others will not dare to challenge it. Once someone begins to push back, whether it's the press, watchdog organizations, or the public, arrogance begins to look like desperation. Abuse of power is sustainable only as long as it goes unquestioned. The moment questions grow louder, the foundations weaken. That is exactly what played out here. The official, who once appeared untouchable, found their every word and action dissected under the microscope of public attention. The scrutiny peeled away layers of performance, leaving nothing but the undeniable truth of misconduct and overreach. Arrogance, in this sense, becomes its own undoing because it blinds individuals to the inevitability of exposure. Believing that they could continue unchecked, the official ignored warnings, dismissed concerns, and doubled down on behavior that made their eventual collapse even more dramatic. Had they exercised humility or restraint, they might have avoided the spotlight of humiliation. But arrogance thrives on the assumption that rules don't apply, that scrutiny can always be dodged, and that the public can be distracted indefinitely. History shows again and again that such assumptions are illusions. Scrutiny is relentless, and when it finally lands, it amplifies the very qualities that officials tried to hide. The power of this moment also lies in its visibility. Collapse under scrutiny is not a private affair. It happens in front of audiences who have been waiting to see arrogance confronted. The Trump officials' humiliation was magnified because it unfolded publicly, under circumstances that made it impossible to spin or conceal. Every reaction, every faltering response, every failed attempt at deflection added to the sense that power was unraveling. Scrutiny is powerful not only because it uncovers truth but because it forces that truth into the light where it cannot be ignored. The arrogance that once looked like confidence began to look like weakness, and the abuse of power that once seemed clever began to look like a stain on integrity. This moment also illustrates why scrutiny is essential in democratic systems. Without it, arrogance grows unchecked, and abuse of power becomes normalized. But with scrutiny, even the most confident officials must face limits. Oversight, journalism, public debate, and civic engagement are tools that ensure arrogance is tested and power is questioned. When those tools are applied consistently, collapse becomes inevitable for those who build their authority on deception or disregard for rules. The Trump officials' humiliation stands as proof of this process. The longer arrogance thrives, the harsher the fall once scrutiny finally catches up. Another striking aspect of this collapse is how quickly arrogance turns to vulnerability when exposed. For years, this official projected control, brushing off criticism as irrelevant noise. Yet once scrutiny turned the spotlight on them, the façade crumbled almost instantly. What had been portrayed as unshakable strength looked fragile, and what had been framed as authority looked desperate. That transformation is the essence of collapse under scrutiny. It is sudden, dramatic, and irreversible. The arrogance that once fueled confidence only accelerates the downfall once the truth is revealed. The abuse of power is always a gamble, and arrogance raises the stakes. Every step taken outside the bounds of integrity increases the chances of exposure, and every act of defiance multiplies the eventual consequences. Scrutiny is patient. It waits until the evidence is undeniable, until the arrogance is too glaring to ignore. In this case, the collapse was not simply a result of one mistake but of years of behavior compounding into a single, defining moment. It was the culmination of arrogance meeting the inevitability of truth. The incident serves as a broader lesson that no individual is above consequences, and it resonates because it touches a fundamental truth about power, responsibility, and accountability. Throughout history, figures in positions of authority have often attempted to shield themselves from the outcomes of their actions, convinced that their influence, connections, or control over narratives would protect them. In the case of this Trump official, that same assumption proved to be their undoing. By believing that power could insulate them from scrutiny, they overlooked the reality that consequences are an inevitable part of leadership. This moment illustrated that no matter how high someone rises, no matter how fiercely they defend themselves, there comes a point when reality demands reckoning. What made this incident especially powerful was the unmistakable clarity it delivered. Authority can delay judgment, but it cannot erase it. The idea that no one is above consequences is central to the functioning of democracy. A society built on laws, norms, and accountability cannot function if some individuals are allowed to act without repercussions while others face the full weight of justice. The Trump officials' humiliation revealed how fragile that illusion of immunity really is. For years, they had conducted themselves with an air of invulnerability, brushing aside critics and treating oversight as a mere obstacle to be sidestepped. Yet when the moment came, that carefully constructed façade collapsed in front of the public eye, showing that Consequences eventually reach even those who believe themselves untouchable. This wasn't just a personal moment of reckoning, it was a symbolic reminder to everyone watching that accountability is not optional. The public nature of this humiliation amplified the lesson in ways that private consequences never could. Behind closed doors, officials can spin narratives, issue quiet apologies, or negotiate settlements that allow them to walk away with reputations intact. But when consequences unfold publicly, when the entire nation can witness the unraveling, the lesson becomes impossible to deny. This incident became a living demonstration of the principle that no title, no position, and no political affiliation can permanently shield someone from the truth. The Trump officials' downfall was magnified not only by their arrogance but by the very stage on which it occurred, the eyes of millions, the lens of history, and the collective judgment of the public. There is also a psychological dimension to why this moment resonated so strongly. People who had long felt powerless in the face of elite influence saw proof that actions do catch up, that the higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. For those who had endured years of watching officials evade accountability, this humiliation provided a sense of balance being restored, even if only temporarily. The idea that no individual is above consequences is not abstract. It speaks directly to the human need for fairness, for the belief that justice, however delayed, still operates. The Trump officials' public collapse became a case study in what happens when someone forgets that their decisions have weight and that the shield of authority cannot last forever. The lesson extends beyond politics. It is a universal truth that arrogance, abuse, and the dismissal of responsibility cannot sustain themselves indefinitely. In workplaces, communities, and institutions, individuals who act as though they are exempt from consequences eventually discover the fragility of that belief. The Trump officials' downfall is simply one of the most visible examples, amplified by media coverage and political stakes. But its implications ripple outward, reminding citizens, leaders, and institutions alike that accountability is the foundation of trust. Without it, systems collapse into cynicism and resentment. With it, even imperfectly applied, there is reassurance that power is still tethered to responsibility. The timing of this incident also matters. In an era when trust in institutions has eroded and many feel that elites operate under a separate set of rules, the public humiliation of such a figure offered a rare counternarrative. It was a visible confirmation that accountability can reach even the most powerful. That lesson is critical because when people begin to believe that some individuals truly are beyond consequences, faith in democracy weakens. By exposing the Trump officials' vulnerability, the incident served as a counterweight to cynicism, showing that systems, while flawed, still have the capacity to bring reckoning. Another aspect that underscores the lesson is the inevitability of exposure. Secrets, misconduct, and arrogance may remain hidden for a time, but they rarely stay buried forever. The Trump official likely believed that control of the narrative, loyalty of allies, and the chaos of political battles would keep scrutiny at bay indefinitely. Yet exposure has a way of surfacing at the most inopportune moment, dismantling carefully constructed defenses. That inevitability is part of what made this humiliation resonate. It was not just that the official faced consequences, but that the timing and visibility amplified the fall to its maximum impact. It proved that the walls of protection around power are more fragile than they appear. The broader lesson also lies in how quickly perceptions shift once consequences arrive. For years, the official may have been feared, respected, or defended by allies who believed in their untouchability. But the moment accountability struck, those same qualities that projected strength became symbols of overreach and hubris. This transformation is a reminder that public opinion is not fixed and that the same arrogance that wins applause from loyalists can, under scrutiny, turn into evidence of weakness. The incident reinforced the idea that power is conditional, dependent on integrity, and vulnerable when exercised carelessly. Finally, the humiliation underscored the reality that accountability is not just about punishment, it is about preserving the integrity of the system itself. When individuals in high office abuse their roles without consequence, the very principles of democracy erode. By facing humiliation in such a public manner, the Trump official became an example of what happens when that balance is restored. The lesson is as clear as it is timeless. Leadership does not grant immunity from consequences, it magnifies them. The higher the responsibility, the greater the reckoning when that responsibility is ignored.